I never expected learning the drive stick shift would become the reason my entire life changed. At the time, I was 21, stuck at home for the summer, working part-time at a hardware store and trying to figure out what I was doing with my future. Most of my friends had already moved away for college or jobs, while I seemed permanently trapped in the same small town I'd grown up in. The worst part? I didn't even know how to drive a manual transmission. That might not sound like a big deal, but my dad owned an old pickup with a stick shift, and every time I stalled it in the driveway, he'd shake his head like I'd personally disappointed generations of our family. "You're never gonna learn if you're scared of it, Kevin." Easy for him to say. Every time I tried, I either killed the engine or nearly launched the truck through the garage door. After the latest disaster, Dad finally gave up. "Maybe someone else can teach you." At the time, I had no idea how important those words would become. Because 2 days later, my older brother Jake invited one of his friends over, Martin. I'd known Martin for years. Everybody knew Martin. He was one of those guys who seemed good at everything without trying. He was 26, worked as a mechanic, played softball on weekends, and somehow managed to be liked by literally everyone. Even my mom adored him. Whenever he came over, she'd magically find reasons to offer him food. "Martin, sweetheart, are you hungry?" The guy could walk through the front door and have a sandwich handed to him before he said hello. Meanwhile, I lived there and had to make my own lunch. Life wasn't fair. I was in the kitchen grabbing a drink when Martin walked in that afternoon. "Hey, Kev." His deep voice always caught me off guard. "Hey," he smiled. "Still trying to murder that truck?" I groaned. "Jake told you?" "He told everybody." "Great." Martin laughed. I hated how much I liked hearing him laugh. Not because I had some huge crush on him. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Sure, I noticed he was attractive. Most people did. He was tall, broad-shouldered, always had grease on his hands from work, and somehow looked better because of it. But noticing someone was attractive didn't mean anything, right? "How bad is it?" he asked. "Pretty bad." "Stalling?" "Constantly." "Grinding gears?" "Yep." Martin nodded seriously. "Dangerous." I rolled my eyes. "I'm serious." "You're enjoying this?" "A little." I grabbed my drink and headed toward the living room. Martin followed. A few minutes later, Jake wandered in. "What's up?" Martin pointed at me. "Your brother needs help." Jake immediately started laughing. "Good luck." I threw a pillow at him. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, Martin looked at me for a second. Then he said something completely unexpected. "I can teach you." The room went quiet. I blinked. "You can?" "Sure." Jake looked between us. "That actually might work." I wasn't sure why my stomach suddenly felt weird. "Really?" Martin shrugged. "I teach new guys at the shop all the time." "You do that?" "Why not?" I stared at him. For some reason, the idea of spending time alone with Martin felt strangely exciting, which was ridiculous. It was driving lessons, not exactly a romantic comedy. Still, I couldn't deny the small rush of anticipation. "When?" I asked. Martin thought for a moment. "Saturday morning. That's early. Learning stick shift isn't for the weak. You're enjoying this way too much." He grinned. "Be ready at 8. Before I could answer, he stood up. "See you then, Kevin." And just like that, he left. The front door closed behind him. Jake immediately smirked. "What?" "Nothing." "Jake." You seem excited. I'm not excited. You definitely are. I threw another pillow at him. The rest of the week passed painfully slowly. By Friday night, I found myself thinking about the lesson more than I wanted to admit. Part of it was finally learning how to drive. But if I was being honest, another part was Martin. I couldn't remember the last time we'd spent time together without my brother around. Every memory I had of him involved group barbecues, family gatherings, or random weekends when he'd stop by the house. Never just us. For some reason, that thought stayed in my head. Saturday arrived faster than expected. At exactly 8 o'clock, a black pickup rolled into our driveway. Martin. I grabbed my keys and headed outside. He was leaning against the truck waiting for me. Dark sunglasses, gray t-shirt, coffee in one hand, looking annoyingly good for someone awake that early. Morning. Morning. Nervous? Maybe. Good. That's not reassuring. He laughed. Then he tossed me the keys. I barely caught them. My eyes widened. What are these? You're driving. I stared at the truck, then at him, then back at the truck. I thought we'd ease into this. Nope. Martin. Kevin. The way he said my name made me stop talking. He opened the passenger door. Get in. I had a feeling that morning was about to become a lot more memorable than either of us expected. The first thing I did was stall the truck. Twice. Actually, make that 3 times. By the third attempt, I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Beside me, Martin looked completely calm, which somehow made it worse. Relax. I am relaxed. You look like you're trying to land a plane. I groaned and dropped my forehead against the wheel. This was a mistake. Martin laughed. No, this is normal. Normal for who? Everybody. I peeked over at him. You stalled when you learned? Oh, absolutely. That surprised me. Martin seemed like the kind of guy who had been born knowing how to drive. You? He nodded. Destroyed my dad's patience. Seriously? 3 straight weeks. I couldn't help smiling. The image of teenage Martin being terrible at something felt impossible. Okay, he said. Try again. I sat up, foot on the clutch. Start the engine. Slowly release. Add gas. The truck lurched forward, then stalled. Again. I sighed dramatically. Martin just shook his head. You're overthinking it. That's easy for you to say. No, seriously. He leaned slightly toward me. Stop trying to do everything perfectly. I looked over. His sunglasses were pushed onto the top of his head now. For a second, our eyes met, and something strange happened. I forgot what I was about to say. Not because of anything dramatic, just because Martin had this annoying habit of looking directly at you when he talked, like you were the only person in the world worth paying attention to. It made it hard to think. You listening? I blinked. Yeah. No, you weren't. Maybe a little. He smirked. Focus, Kevin. I muttered something under my breath. What was that? Nothing. It sounded rude. It was. Martin laughed again. God, I hated how much I liked making him laugh. The next hour went surprisingly well. We stayed in an empty parking lot near an industrial area outside town. No traffic, no pressure, just practice. Eventually, I managed to get the truck moving smoothly. The first time it happened, Martin slapped the dashboard. There you go. I couldn't stop grinning. Did you see that? I was here. I actually did it. You did. For some reason, his approval felt ridiculously good. Better than it should have. We spent another hour driving around quiet roads. Every mistake became less embarrassing. Every successful shift made me more confident. By lunchtime, I was actually enjoying myself. Martin directed me toward a small diner on the edge of town. Pull in here. Why? Because I'm hungry. You just want food. Correct. I parked. Successfully. No stalling. No panic. Martin gave an exaggerated nod. Growth. Thank you. Still not good. I rolled my eyes. Inside the diner, we grabbed a booth near the window. The place was mostly empty. A few older couples, a truck driver eating pie. Nobody paying attention to us. The waitress brought menus. Martin didn't even look at his. You already know what you're getting. I always get the same thing. That's boring. It's efficient. You're secretly 80 years old. Probably. I laughed. The conversation came easier than I expected. Without Jake around, Martin seemed different. Less like my brother's friend. More like just Martin. Someone funny, easy to talk to, comfortable. We ended up talking for almost an hour. Work, movies, music, random stories from high school. At one point, he told me about accidentally locking himself inside a customer's car while working at the shop. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my drink. You did not. I absolutely did. How? I'm not proud of it. You should be. It was embarrassing. It was hilarious. He pointed a fry at me. You're enjoying this way too much. Maybe. The smile he gave me after that lasted longer than it probably should have. Long enough that I felt my chest tighten unexpectedly. I quickly looked away. The weird thing was that moments like that had been happening all morning. Tiny moments. Nothing obvious. Nothing I could explain. But every time Martin looked at me for too long, or laughed at something I said, I became strangely aware of him, of how close he was, of how much attention he was paying to me. And honestly, I wasn't sure what to do with that feeling. After lunch, we headed back outside. The summer heat had started settling in. The parking lot shimmered under the afternoon sun. Martin tossed me the keys again. Round two. I caught them. More driving? You thought we were done? I was hoping. No chance. I groaned dramatically. He opened the passenger door. Get in. A few hours later, I was driving through town without stalling once. The improvement felt incredible. Martin seemed genuinely impressed. You learn fast. I had a good teacher. His expression softened slightly. Thanks. The simple way he said it caught me off guard. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The truck continued down the road. The air conditioner hummed quietly. And somehow, the silence didn't feel awkward. It felt comfortable, natural. Then Martin suddenly pointed ahead. Turn here. I glanced over. This isn't the way home. I know. Where are we going? You'll see. 10 minutes later, we arrived at a small overlook outside town, a place I'd completely forgotten existed. The view stretched across rolling hills and farmland, everything glowing gold beneath the afternoon sun. Martin climbed out first. I followed. The breeze felt nice after hours inside the truck. Why'd we stop here? I asked. He leaned against the hood. Because this is where I learned. I looked at him. Really? Yep. My dad brought me here after my first day. I smiled. Did you stall the truck here too? Several times. Good. Brat. I laughed. The sunlight caught his face as he shook his head, and for a second, Standing there beside him, everything felt strangely perfect, simple, easy. The kind of moment you don't realize matters until much later. Neither of us spoke for a while, just watching the view, the wind, the distant fields. Then Martin broke the silence. "You know, Kevin," I looked over. His expression had changed slightly. Not serious, just thoughtful. "I've always liked hanging out with you." The words hit me harder than they should have. I swallowed. "Oh," he smiled faintly. "You're easy to be around." For some reason, my heart started beating faster. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because there was something different in the way he said it, something I couldn't quite place. And standing there beside him, watching the sun drift lower across the horizon, I had the strange feeling that this driving lesson was becoming about a lot more than learning how to shift gears. After that afternoon at the Overlook, things should have gone back to normal. Instead, they got weird. Not bad weird, just different. For the next few days, I kept thinking about what Martin had said. "I've always liked hanging out with you." It wasn't exactly a life-changing confession. Friends said things like that all the time. The problem was that Martin wasn't just some random friend, and the way he'd looked at me when he said it kept replaying in my head. By Wednesday, I was annoyed with myself. I was 21 years old. I should have had more important things to think about. Instead, I was standing in the hardware store, staring at paint samples, while wondering whether Martin smiled at everyone like that. It was pathetic. My phone buzzed. A text. "Martin, still alive?" I immediately smiled, then immediately got annoyed that I smiled. Me, unfortunately. 3 dots appeared. Martin, good. Me, why? Martin, need another driving lesson. I stared at the screen. My heart did a small, stupid little flip. Me, thought I graduated. Martin, not even close. Me, rude. Martin, tomorrow, 6 p.m. Me, bossy. Martin, see you then. I spent the rest of the day pretending I wasn't looking forward to it. I failed, completely. The next evening, Martin picked me up after work. This time I slid into the driver's seat without being told. He nodded approvingly. "Look at that. I'm evolving. Let's not get carried away." I laughed and started the truck. No stall. Martin pointed toward the road. "Go." For the first 30 minutes, everything was normal. Driving, practicing hills, learning smoother shifts. Then Martin had a terrible idea. "Let's hit the highway." I almost swerved. "What?" "You heard me. I'm not ready." "You are." "I'm definitely not." "Kevin." "No." "Kevin." I glanced over. He was smiling. That stupid, confident smile. The one that somehow made me want to argue and listen at the same time. Fine. 10 minutes later, I was driving on the highway and somehow surviving. Martin sat back in his seat. "See? I hate that you're right. I know. You enjoy this. Very much." The sun was starting to set. Golden light stretched across the road. The truck hummed beneath us. Everything felt surprisingly peaceful. Then Martin asked a question that caught me completely off guard. "You dating anybody?" I nearly missed a gear. "What?" "You heard me." I glanced at him. "Where did that come from?" He shrugged. "Just asking." I focused on the road. "No." "No?" "No." "Why not?" I laughed nervously. You're very interested suddenly. I'm making conversation. Uh-huh. Martin smirked. Seriously, though. I sighed. I don't know. That answer was more honest than I intended. The truth was complicated. Dating had never been easy for me, mostly because I wasn't exactly advertising the fact that I liked guys. Only a handful of people knew. My family didn't, Jake didn't, and definitely not Martin. So dating mostly consisted of awkward apps and conversations that never went anywhere. I guess I haven't met the right person, I said. Martin was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Fair enough. Something about his reaction surprised me. No teasing, no jokes, just understanding. After that, the conversation shifted elsewhere. Movies, work, sports. But part of me kept thinking about that question and why he'd asked it. Eventually, we ended up grabbing burgers from a drive-thru. We parked near a lake on the edge of town. The evening air was cooler now, the sky painted orange and purple above the water. For a while, we just ate and talked. The easy kind of conversation that never feels forced. At some point, Martin leaned back and looked out across the lake. You know something? What? I don't think I've ever seen you this confident. I looked over. What do you mean? You're different lately. I frowned. Different how? He thought for a second. Happier. The answer caught me off guard. I looked down at my food. I guess. I think learning the truck helped. I laughed. That's probably the least exciting reason anyone's ever become happier. Martin chuckled. Maybe. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me. And once again, I found myself forgetting what I was about to say. There was something about his attention. Something intense. Not uncomfortable. Just impossible to ignore. The silence stretched for a few seconds. Then my phone rang. Jake. Perfect timing. I answered. Hey, Mom wants to know where you are. I rolled my eyes. I'm 21. I know. Tell her I'm alive. I already did. Then why are you calling? Because she thinks you're dead. Martin started laughing beside me. Jake immediately noticed. Wait. Uh-oh. Are you with Martin? I glanced over. Maybe. Jake groaned dramatically. You two spend more time together than I spend with him. Martin nearly choked on his drink. That's your fault, I said. No, it's not. You're always busy. Jake muttered something rude. I hung up before he could continue. Martin was still laughing. My brother's jealous. Definitely. Should I be worried? Absolutely. I shook my head. The rest of the evening passed too quickly. Before I knew it, Martin was pulling into my driveway. Neither of us seemed in a rush to get out. The truck sat idling. The porch light glowed across the yard. For some reason, the moment felt strangely important, like neither of us wanted the night to end. Finally, Martin cleared his throat. Same time Saturday? I smiled. More lessons? You're still terrible. That's harsh. Truth hurts. I laughed. Yeah, Saturday works. His smile returned, the one that seemed to appear more often lately. Good. For a second, neither of us moved. Then Jake suddenly opened the front door and yelled from the porch. Are you two done staring at each other? Martin immediately burst out laughing. I nearly died from embarrassment. Good night, Jake, I shouted. Get inside. Martin was still laughing as I climbed out of the truck. And as I walked toward the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between us. I just didn't know what it was yet. By the time Saturday arrived, I had stopped pretending these were just driving lessons, at least to myself. Sure, I was learning. I could start smoothly now, shift without grinding gears, handle hills without panicking. But if driving had been the only reason, Martin wouldn't have kept finding excuses to text me during the week. And I definitely wouldn't have spent half my time waiting for those texts. Still, neither of us said anything. Whatever was happening stayed in that strange space between friendship and something else. The kind of place where every small moment suddenly feels important. Saturday morning started differently. Instead of taking me to an empty parking lot, Martin drove us out toward the countryside. Where are we going? Road trip. That wasn't part of the lesson. It is now. I narrowed my eyes. You're making this up. Correct. I laughed. At least he was honest. About 40 minutes later, we ended up in a small town I'd never visited before. One main street, a gas station, a diner, a few antique stores. The kind of place people drove through without stopping. Martin parked. Come on. What are we doing? Breakfast. You already ate. Second breakfast. You're ridiculous. He grinned. I know. Inside the diner, we grabbed our usual booth by the window. Only this time, it felt different, more comfortable, like we'd done it 100 times before. The waitress recognized Martin immediately. Back again? Unfortunately. She laughed. Your usual? You know it. Then she looked at me. And for you, I ordered. After she left, I shook my head. You come here a lot? Couple times a month. Why? Martin looked out the window. My dad used to bring me. The answer surprised me. I knew Martin's father had passed away a few years earlier, but he rarely talked about him. The smile on his face softened slightly. He taught me how to drive around here. I looked down at the table. Oh, Martin shrugged. Guess I got sentimental. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I smiled. I'm glad you brought me. His eyes lifted to mine, and for a second, something passed between us. Something warm, something real, the kind of look that lingers. The waitress returning with food interrupted it. Neither of us mentioned it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. After breakfast, we spent most of the day exploring back roads, driving, talking, listening to music. At one point, Martin handed me control of the playlist. A terrible mistake. 5 minutes later, he was groaning dramatically. This is awful. It's called taste. It's called emotional damage. I laughed so hard I nearly missed a turn. The day felt easy, natural, like we'd known each other forever. And maybe we had, just not like this. Not without other people around. Not without distractions. Not without constantly discovering new things about each other. By late afternoon, we ended up parked near a small lake, different from the one before. Smaller, quieter, almost completely empty. The summer air was warm. The water reflected the sky like glass. Martin sat on the hood of the truck. I joined him. For a while, we just enjoyed the silence. Then he asked quietly, "Can I ask you something?" I glanced over. Sure. His expression looked unusually serious. What do you want to do? I frowned. With what? Life. I laughed. That's a huge question. I know. I looked out across the lake. Honestly, I didn't have a good answer. I'd spent so much time worrying about what everyone expected from me that I'd never really figured out what I wanted. I don't know. Martin nodded slowly. That's okay. You don't think that's pathetic? No, he looked at me. Most people are pretending they know. That actually made me feel better. For some reason, Martin had a way of doing that, making complicated things seem simple. Then he surprised me again. You know what I think? What? I think you're smarter than you realize. I laughed. You hit your head? I'm serious. His voice was firm enough that my smile faded. You sell yourself short all the time. I stared at him. Nobody had ever said something like that to me before. At least, not in a way that felt genuine. The words hit harder than I expected. Thanks. Martin smiled. You're welcome. The moment lingered, longer than it should have. Long enough that I started noticing things I really shouldn't have been noticing. The sunlight catching his eyes, the rough stubble along his jaw, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. My pulse quickened slightly, and that scared me, because for the first time, I wasn't wondering if I had a crush on Martin. I already knew I did. The realization landed with uncomfortable clarity. I liked him. A lot. The problem? I had absolutely no idea whether he could ever feel the same way. So I pushed the thought away, buried it, changed the subject, and somehow the day continued. By evening, Martin was driving us home. This time I sat in the passenger seat. The sky had turned dark. Music played quietly through the speakers. The road stretched endlessly ahead. At some point, I drifted off, not fully asleep, just relaxed, comfortable, safe. The next thing I knew, Martin was nudging my shoulder. Kevin. I blinked. Huh? We're here. I looked outside. My house. The porch light glowing. I hadn't even realized we'd arrived. Sorry. You needed the nap. I smiled. Apparently, neither of us moved right away. The familiar silence settled between us again. Comfortable. Easy. Dangerous. Because every day it became harder to ignore what I was feeling. Then Martin spoke quietly. You free next Friday? I looked over. Why? There's a softball game. Okay. I thought maybe you'd come. The invitation felt surprisingly personal. Just me. Not Jake. Not a group. Me. My heart sped up. Yeah. His smile appeared immediately. Good. For some reason, that single word stayed with me long after I got out of the truck. And standing in my driveway, watching his taillights disappear down the street, I had a feeling that whatever was happening between us was about to become impossible to ignore. I spent the entire week trying not to think about Friday, which, naturally, meant I thought about it constantly. The softball game wasn't a date. I reminded myself of that at least 20 times. Martin had invited me to watch him play. Friends did that. Normal friends. There was absolutely no reason for me to spend half an hour deciding what shirt to wear. Yet somehow, I still did. By the time Friday evening arrived, I was already annoyed with myself. The field sat on the edge of town, next to a public park. When I pulled into the parking lot, players were already warming up. I spotted Martin almost immediately. That wasn't difficult. He was standing near the dugout, laughing with teammates. The late afternoon sun lit up the field behind him. And unfortunately for my sanity, he looked good. Very good. The second he saw me, his face brightened. That alone nearly ruined me. Kevin! He jogged over. I tried to act normal. Hey, you made it. Apparently. Martin grinned. Glad you're here. My heart did that stupid thing again. the one it had been doing a lot lately. Before I could respond, one of his teammates yells from across the field, "That him?" Martin immediately looked annoyed. I looked confused. That who? Ignore him. Naturally, that made me curious. Martin, Kevin, what does that mean? He sighed dramatically. They've been giving me a hard time. Why? Another teammate shouted. Because he won't shut up about you. I nearly choked. Martin covered his face. The entire team started laughing. Oh my God, he muttered. I couldn't stop smiling. You talk about me? Unfortunately. That's kind of sweet. Please don't encourage them. That only made me laugh harder. For the rest of the evening, I sat in the bleachers watching the game. Martin kept glancing over between innings. Every single time he smiled when he spotted me. Every single time. And every single time, my chest felt lighter. The game ended with his team winning, mostly because Martin somehow managed to hit everything. Show off. Afterward, players started leaving. Eventually, it was just the two of us walking toward the parking lot. You hungry? He asked. Always. Good answer. We grabbed food from a local burger place. Then, instead of going home, Martin drove toward the lake again. At this point, it had become our place. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both knew. The same quiet shoreline, the same peaceful view, the same feeling that time moved differently whenever we were there. We sat on the tailgate of his truck eating fries. The sun had already disappeared. Stars were beginning to appear overhead. For a while, we just talked. Nothing important. Everything important. The kind of conversation that jumps between random topics without effort. Then, eventually, the discussion slowed. A comfortable silence settled between us. The water rippled softly nearby. A cool breeze drifted across the lake. And for the first time all evening, neither of us seemed eager to fill the silence. Martin looked out at the water. You know, what? I'm glad I offered to teach you. I smiled. Even though I stalled your truck 50 times? At least. I laughed. Then my smile softened. Me too. Martin glanced over. The look he gave me made my stomach flip. There it was again. That feeling. That strange intensity. Like there was something he wanted to say. Something neither of us quite knew how to start. My pulse quickened. The silence stretched. Neither of us looked away. For a second, it felt like the entire world disappeared. Just me. Just Martin. Just this moment. Then he quietly asked, "Can I tell you something?" My heart immediately sped up. Sure. He looked down briefly, then back at me. And for the first time since I'd known him, Martin seemed nervous. Actually nervous. I almost didn't ask you to learn stick. I frowned. Why? A small laugh escaped him. Because I was worried. Worried about what? His jaw tightened slightly, as if choosing his words carefully. Then he shook his head. Never mind. Martin. He smiled weakly. Forget it. I stared at him. No. His eyes met mine, and suddenly neither of us seemed capable of looking away. The air felt heavier. The distance between us felt smaller, dangerously smaller. Then Martin exhaled slowly. I like spending time with you. My heart nearly stopped, not because of the words themselves, because of the way he said them. The honesty, the vulnerability, the look in his eyes. Everything I'd been trying to ignore came crashing back all at once. I swallowed. I like spending time with you too. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The silence that followed felt completely different from every silence before it. Charged, uncertain, hopeful, and terrifying. Then Martin laughed softly. Well, well, that wasn't awkward. I burst out laughing. The tension immediately broke, but not completely, because something had changed. Something real. The rest of the drive home felt different, lighter, warmer, like we'd finally acknowledged something without fully naming it. When we reached my house, neither of us seemed eager to say goodbye. Again, a pattern was definitely developing. I leaned against the open truck door. Martin sat behind the wheel. The porch light glowed across the yard. Everything felt strangely quiet. Then he spoke. Kevin. Yeah? For a second, he just looked at me, and whatever he saw seemed to make up his mind about something. Want to grab dinner tomorrow? My heart skipped. I tried to sound casual. Sure. His smile widened. Just us. There it was. The words landed gently, but they landed. Just us. I smiled back. Yeah. Neither of us called it a date, but as I walked toward the house, there was one thing I knew for certain. Tomorrow was going to change everything. The next day felt longer than any day should. I tried distracting myself, worked a short shift, cleaned my room, even helped my mom carry groceries. Nothing worked. Every time I checked the clock, somehow only 5 minutes had passed. By the time evening arrived, I was ready to lose my mind. Then my phone buzzed. Martin. Outside. My stomach immediately flipped. I grabbed my keys and headed out before I could overthink it. Martin was waiting beside his truck. The second he saw me, he smiled. And once again, everything felt easier. Hey, hey, you look nervous. I pointed at him. So do you. He laughed. Fair. That alone made me feel better. Because if Martin was nervous too, maybe I wasn't imagining things. Maybe this wasn't one-sided. The thought followed me all the way to the restaurant. It wasn't fancy, just a small place near the river. The kind of restaurant that felt cozy instead of expensive. The kind of place people chose because they actually wanted to talk, not because they wanted to impress somebody. That realization wasn't helping my nerves. Dinner started normally enough. Food, conversation, jokes. The familiar rhythm we developed over the past few weeks. But underneath it all, something felt different. More intentional. More personal. At one point, Martin caught me smiling. What? I shook my head. Nothing. Kevin. You seem happy. The answer slipped out before I could stop it. Martin stared at me for a second. Then his expression softened. Yeah. Yeah? Yeah. His smile appeared again, smaller this time, more genuine. The kind of smile that wasn't for everyone, just me. And for some reason, that meant everything. After dinner, we walked along the river. The sun had already disappeared. Street lights reflected across the water. The evening air was cool, comfortable. Neither of us seemed interested in rushing home. At some point, our shoulders brushed. Neither of us moved away. My heart immediately noticed. So did the rest of me. The problem wasn't the contact itself. It was how natural it felt, like we'd been doing it forever. We continued walking, talking quietly, the town around us slowly settling into nighttime silence. Then Martin suddenly stopped. I looked over. What? He seemed unusually serious, and for the first time all night, neither of us smiled. I need to tell you something. My stomach dropped. Not in a bad way, just the overwhelming realization that this was it. The conversation. The one we'd been dancing around for weeks. I swallowed. Okay. Martin looked down briefly, then back at me, his eyes locked onto mine. I almost didn't offer those driving lessons. My heart started pounding. You said that before. I know. He took a breath, then another, clearly trying to organize his thoughts. Finally, he laughed softly. I sound ridiculous. Martin, I'm serious. I stepped closer, just enough. The distance between us suddenly felt important. What is it? For a second, he didn't answer. Then the words finally came. Because I liked you. Everything stopped. The sounds around us, the river, the traffic, my thoughts, everything. I just stared at him. Martin looked nervous. Actually nervous. More nervous than I'd ever seen him. And somehow, that made the moment feel even more real. I've liked you for a while, Kevin. My pulse was pounding so hard it hurt. A while? He nodded. Longer than I should have. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Part of me wondered if I'd somehow fallen asleep and dreamed the entire evening. Because this was impossible. Martin, my brother's friend, the guy I'd spent weeks convincing myself could never feel the same way, standing right in front of me, telling me exactly what I've been hoping to hear. You, I laughed nervously. You like me? His expression immediately became amused. That is the part of the sentence you focused on. I covered my face. Oh my God. Martin laughed too. The tension cracked instantly, not disappearing, just becoming manageable, real. When I lowered my hands, he was still smiling, still looking at me, still waiting. And suddenly I realized something. I didn't have to hide anymore. Not with him. Not now. So I took a breath and told the truth. I like you too. The words felt terrifying, imperfect. Martin froze, just for a second. Then the biggest smile I'd ever seen appeared on his face. A real one, unfiltered, happy. And seeing it made my own smile impossible to stop. You do? I rolled my eyes. Really? Sorry, he laughed. I just needed to hear it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We simply stood there smiling like idiots. The entire world suddenly brighter than it had been an hour earlier. Then Martin rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit I'd never noticed before. Can I ask something? Sure. His eyes flicked briefly toward my mouth, then back to my eyes. And suddenly I knew exactly what he was about to ask. My heart nearly exploded. Yeah, I said quietly. Martin blinked. I didn't even ask yet. You were going to. His laugh was immediate. Maybe. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he stepped closer, slowly, giving me every chance to change my mind. I didn't, not even for a second. And when he finally kissed me, it felt surprisingly simple. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just right. Like arriving somewhere you'd been heading for a long time without realizing it. When we eventually pulled apart, both of us were smiling. Still nervous, still happy, still slightly shocked. Martin shook his head. This is probably the best driving lesson I've ever taught. I laughed so hard I nearly doubled over. That joke was terrible. It was. Absolutely terrible. Worth it. Honestly, it was. Because for the first time since we'd met, neither of us had anything left to hide. And standing beside the river with Martin's hand finding mine, I had a feeling the hardest part was finally behind us. Unfortunately, we still had one very important problem left: my brother. For exactly 24 hours, Martin and I avoided talking about Jake, which was easy, because we were both too busy enjoying the fact that we'd finally admitted how we felt. The problem was that reality eventually catches up, and reality's name was Jake, my older brother, Martin's best friend, the guy who was absolutely going to notice something. The first sign came Sunday afternoon. Martin stopped by the house. Normally that wouldn't have been unusual. The problem was that now, every glance felt different. Every smile felt different. Everything felt different. And apparently Jake noticed immediately. We were sitting in the backyard. My mom was gardening. Dad was working on something in the garage. Jake was grilling burgers. A completely normal family afternoon. Except for the fact that Martin and I couldn't stop smiling at each other. At one point, I handed him a drink. Our fingers brushed. Tiny moment. Nobody should have noticed. Unfortunately, Jake noticed everything. His eyes narrowed. Then he looked at me. Then at Martin. Then back at me. Oh no. My stomach dropped. Martin nearly choked on his drink. Jake pointed dramatically. No. What? I asked. His eyes widened. No. Martin covered his face, which was the worst possible response, because Jake immediately pointed harder. I knew it! My mom looked up from the flowers. What? Jake spun toward her. They're doing that thing. Mom frowned. What thing? The thing where people like each other. The entire backyard went silent. I wanted to disappear. Immediately. Dad looked confused. My mom looked confused. Jake looked like he'd solved a murder mystery. Martin looked ready to launch himself into traffic. And I couldn't stop laughing. That made everything worse. Jake pointed at me. Look at him. I can't help it. You like him. At this point, my mother finally understood. Her eyes widened. Then she looked at Martin. Then at me. Then she smiled. Oh. I froze. Martin froze. Jake froze. Mom smiled even wider. Oh. The second oh was somehow worse. Dad finally caught up. He blinked twice, then shrugged. Okay. That was it. Just okay. I stared at him. That's your reaction? Dad looked genuinely confused. What else was I supposed to say? Honestly? Fair point. Jake sat down dramatically. I can't believe this. Martin laughed nervously. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Jake pointed at him. You stole my brother. Martin immediately pointed back. You introduced us. Jake opened his mouth, paused, then groaned. Damn it. The entire backyard burst out laughing, including him, which was a huge relief. Because if I was being honest, Jake's reaction had been the one I'd worried about most. Later that evening, after everyone had calmed down, Jake found me alone in the kitchen. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned against the counter. So, I smiled. So, you happy? The question surprised me, because for once he wasn't teasing. He was serious. A real older brother moment. I thought about the answer, then smiled. Yeah, Jake nodded slowly. Good. That was all. No jokes, no lectures, just good. And somehow, that meant a lot. A few days later, Martin picked me up after work. This time openly. No pretending, no confusion, no uncertainty. Just us. We drove out toward the same overlook where he'd first brought me weeks earlier, the place where everything had started. The sun was setting again, golden light stretching across the hills. The view looked exactly the same and completely different, because now I stood beside him instead of wondering about him. Martin leaned against the hood. I stood next to him, our shoulders touching lightly, comfortably, naturally, the way they always seemed to now. Remember the first day? He asked. I laughed. When I stalled your truck every 30 seconds? Good memories. You were insufferable. I was charming. You were smug. Martin grinned. Still am. I couldn't argue with that. For a while, we watched the sunset. Quiet, peaceful. Then I looked over. Martin was already looking at me, a habit he'd never quite broken. What? He smiled. Nothing. You're staring again. I know. I shook my head. You realize this whole thing happened because of a driving lesson. Best decision I ever made. The answer came so quickly that my chest tightened. Not from nerves this time. Something warmer. Something steadier. The kind of feeling that settles deep and stays there. I stepped a little closer. Martin's smile softened. Neither of us needed words. Not anymore. Because somehow, the thing I'd spent weeks worrying about had become incredibly simple. I liked him. He liked me. And for once, life wasn't complicated. At least, not right now. The final part of the story still hadn't happened. But standing there beside him, watching the sun disappear beyond the horizon, I already knew one thing. Learning to drive stick wasn't what changed my life. Meeting Martin all those years ago had. I just hadn't realized it until now. The funny thing about finally getting what you want is that life doesn't suddenly become perfect. Movies make it seem that way. One big confession, one kiss, roll credits. Reality is a little messier, and honestly, a lot better. The weeks after Martin and I got together felt surprisingly normal, in the best possible way. There wasn't some dramatic shift where everything suddenly changed overnight. Instead, it was 100 little things. The way he'd text me first thing in the morning. The way he'd automatically save me a seat whenever we met somewhere. The way he'd look for me in a crowd without even thinking about it. Small things, simple things, the kinds of things that matter. A month after our first date, I was driving myself home from work when my phone buzzed. At a red light, I glanced down. Martin, got something to show you. I smiled immediately. Me, should I be worried? Martin, definitely. That response was never reassuring. An hour later, I pulled into the parking lot outside his garage. By now, I came by often enough that nobody questioned it. One of the mechanics spotted me. Kevin. Hey. He pointed toward the back. Your boyfriend's been acting weird all day. That doesn't narrow it down. The guy laughed. Fair. I found Martin inside one of the service bays. The second he saw me, he grinned. There you are. Apparently. Come here. Those words should have made me suspicious. Instead, I walked right over. Big mistake. Martin immediately tossed me a set of keys. I caught them automatically, then frowned. What are these? He pointed behind me. I turned around and froze. The truck, not his black pickup. The old manual truck I'd spent weeks learning on. The same truck, the same stubborn transmission, the same truck that had started everything. Except now, it looked completely different. Fresh paint, new tires, restored, perfect. I stared at it, then at him, then back at the truck. What did you do? Martin looked ridiculously pleased with himself. Fixed her up. My jaw dropped. Martin. What? This had to cost a fortune. He shrugged. A little. A little? He laughed. Okay, maybe more than a little. I walked around the truck slowly, barely believing what I was seeing. It looked incredible. Better than I remembered. Better than it had any right to look. Finally, I turned back toward him. Why? Martin's expression softened. The teasing disappeared, and for a moment, it was just him. The real him. The one I loved. Because this truck matters. I blinked. What? He stepped closer. This is where everything started. My chest tightened instantly. Martin smiled. You stalled this thing about 1,000 times. That number feels exaggerated. It's not. I rolled my eyes. He continued anyway. But every time we got in that truck, I got another excuse to spend time with you. The words hit me harder than they should have, especially because I knew he meant every one of them. I laughed quietly. You were using driving lessons to flirt? Absolutely. You could have just asked me out. Martin groaned. You make it sound easy. I couldn't stop smiling, because honestly, he had a point. Neither of us had exactly been brave. For a long moment, we just stood there, looking at each other. Then I glanced back at the truck and suddenly noticed something. A small envelope sitting on the dashboard. I frowned. What's that? Martin immediately looked nervous. Actually nervous, which was unusual. My heart skipped. Martin? He rubbed the back of his neck. The habit I'd come to recognize whenever he was worried. Open it. Now my pulse was definitely speeding up. I climbed into the truck, picked up the envelope, opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. A title. Nothing else. Just a title. Kevin's Truck. I stared at it, confused. Then I looked up. Martin was smiling, but there was nervousness underneath it. Real nervousness. The kind that mattered. Martin. He took a breath, then laughed once, mostly at himself. I bought it. My brain completely stopped working. What? The truck. I blinked. What? I bought it. Still nothing. My brain had fully left the building. Martin laughed. The owner was selling it. I stared. You bought the truck? Yes. The truck. Kevin. The truck. He was trying not to laugh now. Finally, he stepped closer, and his voice softened. I thought maybe someday you'd want it. For a second, I couldn't speak. At all. Because suddenly it wasn't about the truck anymore. It was about everything behind it. Every lesson, every conversation, every mile we'd driven together. Every moment that had slowly turned into something bigger, something real. I swallowed hard. That's insane. Martin smiled. A little. You bought me a truck. Technically, I bought a very unreliable piece of machinery. I laughed despite myself, then shook my head. You are ridiculous. I've been told. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him. Martin immediately hugged me back, holding me tightly, comfortably, like he always did. I love you, I said quietly. The words came out before I could think about them. For half a second, everything went still. Then I felt him smile against my shoulder. I love you too. Simple, honest, perfect. A few months earlier, I'd been terrified of a stick shift, terrified of my feelings, terrified of taking chances. Now, now I was standing in a garage with the man I loved, holding the keys to the truck that had changed everything. Funny how life works. Sometimes you think you're learning how to drive, and instead, you end up finding exactly where you're supposed to be.